Good afternoon. My name is Shayla Hoover, and today I will be teaching a lesson for a first grade CTT classroom. This lesson will be about living versus non-living things. So the Common Core standards that I hope to reach by the end of this lesson is that students will be able to describe the characteristics of and variations between living and non-living things. My big idea or my focus question is how can we tell the difference between a living and non-living thing? So moving down and along here, my learning targets or my focus is by the end of this lesson, students can sort objects as living and non-living. Students can identify and describe characteristics that distinguish living and non-living things. Students can understand that living things reproduce and non-living things do not reproduce. Some of the materials that I would need would be a science reading about living versus non-living things, a KWL chart, magazines, pencils, projector screen, science notebook, and living and non-living things chart, as well as post-its. So moving along here, I'm just going to go ahead to my procedure because a lot of these things here are just repetitive, and I know that, I can be talking forever if I do so. So moving along here, my hook would be for me to ask students what they learned about living things. I would wait for at least 5 students to respond, and I would look for answers that include, living things need air, they need water, they need food, they can grow, they can move, and they can reproduce. So I would, this is a second part lesson. So with the first part, we began our KWL chart. So here I would just add on whatever the students say onto our KWL chart. Another thing that I would do is I would use a projector screen, and there would be a photograph. The photograph would be of a living frog and one would be a non-living frog. And my question is, how are the two frogs different? So I would allow the students a few minutes to turn and talk with their partner about how the two frogs are different. So while the students are discussing with the partner, I would go around and listen to conversations that were taking place within the pairs. I would listen for students to discuss characteristics of a living thing. After a few minutes, I would ask one pair to share some differences that they notice. So some misconceptions that I'm expecting to hear are that, Miss Hooper, I see that the frog has a winder, and with the winder on top of the frog, the non-living frog that is, the frog can move. But what I want them to understand is that non-living frog is operated by a human, and in order for that frog to move, someone has to turn the little thing at the top of it in order for it to move. A living thing, they don't need anyone to move it for them. They move on their own. So moving down here would be my main lesson or my teach moment. And I would discuss new science vocabulary for them. Well, not so new because we introduced it yesterday, but just to go over what a living thing is and what a non-living thing is. And a living thing, again, needs food, needs water, can move by itself, can reproduce. And for a non-living thing, when you see the word non, it means not. Therefore, when you put the words non and living together, it means that something is not living. Non-living things, they don't need food, they don't reproduce, they don't grow, and they don't move on their own. The teacher would, again, ask another way to assess what the students are understanding. Look around the classroom, tell me some things that are living versus non-living. So for my guided practice, I would have a passage about living versus non-living things. And throughout the passage, students can raise their hand and discuss when they see new information about living versus non-living things. Now, at this point, we would be reading together. What they can also do is underline and highlight when they see new information about living versus non-living things. I will provide some students with post-its where they can write down information about living versus non-living things based on the readings, and then we can add it to our chart. We have a chart in the room that would say living, and on the other side it would say non-living. And based off of what they're listening to or what they're reading, they're going to write these things down on the post-its, and the post-its are going to be if they're speaking about something living, they're going to take their post-it and they're going to post it under the section that says living, and vice versa. I'll make comments based on what they wrote down, and I'll clear up any kind of misconceptions if necessary. So moving along to my independent practice, students are encouraged to reread the passage that we just read. And now at the bottom of that passage would be some review questions. For my students that I believe can do this by themselves, this is a chance for them to just have a little time to reread it on their own, just in case they missed anything or just in case there's something that they didn't quite understand. They can do so independently. And for the students that need extra guidance or assistance, I'll be giving them a separate worksheet with different pictures of living and, I'm sorry, that's a typo there, but it should be non-living things. They'll have their pencils with them, and what they'll do is they'll circle the different living things, and then they'll put an X over the things that are non-living. This will be their opportunity to work with me independently on the rug area. That way I can, watch and monitor to see, if there are any kind of misconceptions, or any misunderstandings that we haven't covered throughout the lesson thus far. After some minutes, we'll review it all together. Everyone, well, not everyone, because I'm sure we won't have enough time, but I would try my best to hear a lot of my students share out what they did during independent practice time. So to close out the lesson, students will complete an exit slip. Everyone in the classroom will have an exit slip. For my students that, are kind of lower level or lower achieving, they would draw pictures of themselves coming to school, and in this particular picture, they would have to draw 3 non-living and 3 living things. For my higher achiever students or my higher level learners, what they would do is write a paragraph about, what they pretty much learned during this lesson about living and non-living things. So here I just kind of mapped out how I would differentiate yet again. Throughout the lesson, as I mentioned before, there'll be opportunities to differentiate. For example, during independent practice, students will have their own worksheets that meet their ability level. During independent practice, a teacher will, walk around to track their progress and to see if they need any other assistance with anything. I'm sorry, let me just go back up here. If there are any students that need assistance, the teacher will help them to decode the reading that we just read, so that they can understand it better. Again, for my students that have IEP goals, it would definitely be discussed prior to this lesson plan. That way I know what I need to do to reach their goals. I would discuss this with a special education teacher. As far as differentiating for cultural factors, if I have any students in my room that are from different countries, or Spanish speaking countries, I would try my hardest to label everything in English and Spanish. The assessment worksheets, where I work with the students on the rug area, I would try to include or incorporate some pictures of some things that are familiar to them from their culture. I discussed the fact that they're going to have a exit slip, and I discussed the materials with you. For my classroom management, what I would do is, I know that positive reinforcement is always encouraged. Giving students rewards and praises for positive behavior is useful when trying to manage a class. There will be some students who take a while to get on task, I'm sure, but I would encourage them to stay on task and, reward them with praises. In my experience teaching, these students love for a teacher to praise them and acknowledge that they're doing the right thing. If there are any students who are, known for calling out, I would definitely eliminate this by reminding them of the rules, and if necessary, then I would refer to my traffic behavioral chart where it's red, yellow, and green. If they're not on task, they move down to yellow. If I have to continue to speak to them about the same thing, they just move along to red. And again, throughout the lesson, I know that there will be opportunities for me to give my constructive feedback and see, based on how they're responding to questions, why things are classified as living and non-living things. Like I know inside of the worksheet that I'll be giving them, it's about, birds and plants and things like that, and they'll be able to answer these questions that you see here on the screen. My type of assessment would be the exit slip, and based on how they're answering the questions and the charts that we have around the room. So again, we have plenty of ways to assess these students throughout the lesson. And this pretty much sums up my lesson. Thank you so much for listening.